You'll need a few tools. I recommend some sort of project mat, something you
Guy's done a
don't
little
mind getting
soldering in
burned
his
or
life, I
cut.
think.
Ideally, it should be an ESD mat that's connected to ground of your building or your home. You'll obviously need a soldering
Geek
iron.
brand
I
on
like
his
something with a
jacket.
changeable tip and something that you can adjust the temperature on. Optionally, you'll need something to clean your tip with. Tip tinner is a good thing to have,
Keep
but
your
it's
tip
optional.
clean.
You can do it with solder as well. When your tip gets oxidized or dirty, you can just apply a little solder and clean it off. You'll also need either a brass sponge or a regular sponge that's been soaked in water. I recommend something like a third hand or a helping hand.
Bow tie does not
something
look
like a
great with that
vise.
outfit.
You can put the board above the mat level,
Sure is a-
so if you need it
it
closer
is a
to
thing
your
though,
eyes, those
Rage.
come in handy. But once again, that's optional. We won't really be using that. You're gonna need some solder.
There is a
And I recommend
statement.
something small in diameter. This is 20/1000ths of an inch. This is also water-soluble flux core, and it's lead-free. If you make a mistake, I recommend getting some wick, and I'll show you how to use this later. This is useful for taking solder up off of pads or bridged pins. You're going to need some sort of
It
external
rarely
flux, and this
does.
is where this flux pen comes in handy.
Yeah.
Every time we melt solder,
Can't say there's
the flux
many-
inside of that solder burns off.
Many
and
times
if
a
you need
bow
to
tie looks
remelt that
great.
solder, you have to apply some sort of flux
And with a
to
lab
it.
coat.
So we need external flux in this case. And you notice that this is
Had to give him some credit for
water-soluble
attempting the bow
flux, and
tie.
It matches the core
It's a
of the
little bit.
solder.
He tried it. This wasn't
Next, we need
successful.
some tweezers. This is useful for holding the module. I also
Well, I
recommend
don't have
having
tweezers.
something sharp around if you need to cut off the used part of the solder wick. You can use scissors or an X-Acto blade, but diagonal cutters seem to do the job as well. Let's talk about cleaning your board.
Dapper
If you're
solder
using
guy's
flux,
bugging me.
specifically water-soluble or rosin flux, you really should clean it off your board. Water-soluble flux in particular can be nasty. I've seen it be corrosive, eat away at traces, solder, even PCBs if left on the board for some time. I've also noticed that water-soluble flux can be conductive
Right.
on the
I've already
order of a
watched
few
this, so-
mega ohms, and that's still enough to bring a line
Let's,
up. You go to grab it, it's right there, and there's no
Let's
cable
get to the
crossing.
actual
Plus or
soldering
minus
part.
50 degrees from that, and you'll be okay. The first thing you'll need to do is clean your tip. If you ever see
Clean
the
the
tip
tip.
become black, oxidized, or clumpy,
Just
you'll
gotta
either
tip
need to
something to
apply
that.
some solder, or you need to dunk it in some tip tinner. In this case, we're just going to apply some solder to the tip until it melts, and then we're going to scrape it across the brass sponge.
I haven't LiDAR, but I was actually out of
The
electrical
tip should
tape
come
and I
back
got
nice,
some
shiny,
today.
and silver.
Do you Rage? That's
Repeat
good.
that process if there's any more clumps
Helps.
or oxidation.
Helps in a lot of
until
ways.
the tip is actually shiny.
Very
Next,
healthy
we need
for
to
you.
line up the module. You'll notice that there's a marking on this breakout board that says IC and crystal. On the module,
Yeah,
there's
I
an
will-
IC
I will do
here
that now
and
later.
a crystal on this side. So spin it around until those two things line up. In this case, we have the crystal lined up with the crystal and the IC lined up with the IC marking. Since there's no designation for pin 1, we just pick an arbitrary pin
Time to put on the
one of
gloves.
corners. We're going to apply the iron first and then start feeding some solder into that joint to create a little mound of solder on one of the pins. I recommend always scraping the tip
Like, you
across
see how
your
he did
brass
that,
sponge
but
or wet
I don't know if I'm
sponge
gonna be able to
whenever
do that
you're
on this
done.
board.
Since we've melted that solder and we're going to reheat it, you'll need to apply some flux. We're going to take our flux pen here, get some flux to come out, and go ahead and flux up that little mound of solder. Now we want to grab our tweezers, grab the module with those tweezers,
I've never used flux, but I got some.
move the module into
For watching
place,
this.
making sure that your alignment is still correct. Apply the hot iron tip to the little mound
Somewhere.
of solder. It's going to melt, and then you're going to slide the module into place, making sure that the tip touches the castellated via. Twist the module so that all the pins line up
Through
to
the
the
tip
pads.
touches everybody.
Remove the iron,
Gotta touch.
wait for the solder to solidify, and then remove the tweezers. At this point, you can go ahead and check to make sure that everything is lined up. Once you've soldered that first pin into place,
Okay,
and
so let's just get. Let's
solidify
try to get
so
to
the
that.
tip touches going to
Sorry.
grab the module with those tweezers.
So we'll put the module up there. We'll get a
Move the
little
module into
get a
place,
little
making
solder
sure that your
there.
alignment is still correct. Apply the hot iron tip to the little mound of solder. It's going to melt,
Yeah.
and then you're
we
going to
just slide it
the
in.
module into place, making sure that the tip touches the castellated via.
Maybe I do
Twist
need
the
some.
module so that all the pins
Tip has
line
always
up
got
to
to
the
touch,
pads.
Mink. You're not wrong.
Remove the iron.
Welcome in, Mink. Good to see you.
Wait for the solder
Let
to
me get some
solidify,
tweezers real quick, guys. Hold
and
on.
then remove the tweezers. At this point, you can go ahead and check to make sure that everything is lined up. Once you've soldered that first pin into place and ensured that the module is lined up with all the pads, we can go ahead and solder the rest of the pins. Take your tip and place it on the next pad. Move it just inside
I don't really need
that
tweezers. but
castellated via, leaving a little bit of a gap.
Got tweezers
Let
and
it
some
heat
cutters.
up, and then we're going to apply solder to that joint.
Off, I mean, you
Once
can go
you got-
past the tip too, but the tip is really what you got to keep clean and keep contact there. You can see up further on the shaft, it can be a little dirty, but the tip is the most important thing. On my soldering iron, I just replaced the tip actually, so we've got a nice clean tip here. Yeah, again, the shaft, it's gonna get a little discolored. These things get really hot